Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to talk to you about what is arguably Jane Austen's least loved book, Mansfield Park. Jane Austen is a well-respected and well-loved figure of the Western literary canon. Her works inspire retelling after retelling because people just can't seem to get enough of her complex societal portraits that always seem to end in that happily ever after. Even if you are not a dedicated reader, you have absolutely heard of Pride and Prejudice, and perhaps even Sense and Sensibility. But there's one work of hers that has not just fallen to the background. It seems to now be considered almost a footnote to the rest of her catalog. Mansfield Park was Jane Austen's third published novel. It was published in 1814, the year after Pride and Prejudice was released, and although it sold extremely well and brought in more money than Austen had ever seen from her work up to that point, it was entirely ignored by critics for 3 full years. And since then, reception of the book has been mixed from both critics and pleasure readers alike. It's a very widely debated book, as are all of Jane Austen's novels, but it seems like most of the modern debate revolves around whether or not it's even worth the bother of reading. I've seen plenty of people refer to this book as missable, a part of Jane Austen's catalog reserved for completists and fanatics. I can certainly think of very few instances where this book is brought up in greater conversations about Austen, and certainly I've seen very few people point to this book as their favorite Austen. And to be honest, who can blame people for thinking this book a disappointment in comparison to her other novels, especially Pride and Prejudice? Pride and Prejudice gives you a struggle of wills between two fiery, passionate individuals, comedy and chaos from the side characters, and the gradual onset of deep love. It is an adrenaline hit of a period piece, and it is just fabulous. So how can Mansfield Park compete? Quiet little Fanny Price is no wisecracking Lizzie Bennet, and prim yet oblivious Edmund is certainly no, I'll just take a casual dip in this pond, Mr. Darcy. Well, in this video, I want to talk to you about my thoughts on Mansfield Park, and why I think it would be wrong to dismiss it as an inferior Austen work, and why Fanny Price is every bit the heroine as Austen's other leading ladies. At the beginning of Mansfield Park, we discover that years ago, 3 different sisters entered into 3 very different marriages. The middle sister makes a very advantageous match and marries a baronet, giving her sisters a platform to marry above their station. The eldest sister takes this opportunity and sets herself up very comfortably, while the youngest, it can be said in plain terms, marries herself into poverty for the sake of love. This causes a break between the sisters, and fast forward a couple of decades later, and this youngest sister, Mrs. Price, is about to have yet another baby. I believe they say it's her 8th, that she and her husband just cannot afford. To help the family, the eldest sister and her husband, Lady and Sir Thomas Bertram, decide to take in the Price's oldest daughter, their niece Fanny, to be raised alongside their own children at Mansfield Park. But although they extend their home to Fanny, it's made immediately clear to her and everyone else that she is not equal to their children in status or esteem, and she ends up becoming a companion to her Aunt Bertram more than anything else. And where this clear separation from her cousins and blatant disregard of her needs that continues through the entire novel may inspire rage and resentment in another character, Fanny takes it all in stride. She is quiet and bookish. She wants to be helpful. She is also highly moral. And these are not the only ways that she seems to us a submissive presence when we're first introduced to her. She is also of a weak constitution physically. She is only 18 years old, and yet after even a little bit of exercise, she gets winded and tired, needs to take a break. It's almost as though she has something wrong with her physically that is never really diagnosed. In short, she is hardly the axe-wielding, kick-ass female main character that YA of today glorifies. So we're presented with this character who is feeble of body, perpetually overlooked, and pretty much toes the line of what was expected of women in those days. While that may on the surface seem to us that she's not a woman of substance, not someone who we can root for, someone who we can feel for, I would urge you not to discount her. I think it's easy for us to raise a fist in the face of Fanny's neglect. How dare they treat her like that? How can she just sit there and be spoken to like that? Why is she not filled with hatred for these relations like some kind of Cinderella figure? The fact that those types of characteristics in Fanny are absent isn't an indication of a boring character. In fact, I think it's foreshadowing for the strength that Fanny shows us later on. Fanny certainly internalizes some of the criticism that she receives from her family and sees herself as less than worthy. We can see this in the way that she carries herself sometimes. But mainly, she's able to let nasty remarks, particularly from her Aunt Norris, the eldest of those three sisters, just roll off her back. Can you imagine sitting in a room with a family member who is busy telling you how you should be just counting your lucky stars, that you even get to be there, and how your cousins are so much better than you that it's not even funny? Would you be able to take that? You can say, why doesn't she stick up for herself? Give her aunt some sass in response. I think there are two reasons. Number one, Fanny knows how lucky she is to be there. Not everything her aunt is saying is untrue, but we'll get back to that later. But the second reason, nothing good can come of her fighting back. It's just going to make her life harder, and Fanny has limited energy as it is. Fanny is smart enough to know by this point in her life what her aunt is like, and we can assume that she's heard these same comments so many times up to this point in her life that they cease to be harmful. If you get an injury in the same spot over and over again, you are probably going to develop a callus. Every single time Mrs. Norris aims a jab at Fanny, she gives no outward impression that those words are wounding her. Whether they are or not, she knows better than to lean into this woman's provocations. That kind of control over yourself is learned, and it takes a whole lot of inner strength and composure. She alone in the household faces this vitriol. Her cousins, the boys Tom and Edmund, and the girls Mariah and Julia, are doted on. The finest educations, anything their hearts desire is theirs. When the book kicks off, the eldest of her cousins, Mariah, is being courted by a very wealthy man in the area. The match being set up by good old Aunt Norris, who is obsessed with her nieces and never lets Fanny forget it. In the midst of all of this, two charming and wealthy Londoners, brother-sister pair Henry and Mary Crawford, come to visit nearby and quickly enter the social circle. And then the eldest son of the Bertrams, the boozy and flippant Tom, comes home, and the entire group of them decide to stage a play that is very popular in London, but contains language and themes considered highly inappropriate during this time period. Fanny and, at first, her cousin Edmund staunchly oppose this play, especially since the master of the house isn't home and would not approve of this going down in his house. But Edmund is transfixed by Mary Crawford and is eventually, to Fanny's horror, convinced to join in. I've seen criticisms of this aspect of the plot because Sir Thomas Bertram, the master of the house, comes home and squashes the whole thing before the play can come to fruition, so it can seem like a bit of a moot plot point. But I think it's really important in setting up just how steadfast of a character Fanny is, especially in comparison to her cousins, who are very, very susceptible to leaning into whims and fancies. Both of her cousins flagrantly flirt with Henry Crawford. In the case of Mariah, right in front of her fiancé, and Henry encourages it. Not 1 second of this is missed by Fanny, and she is not a fan of the Crawfords. She sees that they have a glaring disregard for anyone but themselves, and she is bound to see and feel that the most deeply, since due to her nature and as a result of her upbringing, she always puts others above herself. Mr. Henry Crawford is very used to being adored, and he starts to chafe under Fanny's very obvious disapproval. He decides he wants to win her regard, and on his path to do so, he starts to notice what everyone else does, that Fanny is a really good person. She is a moral pillar, and she is well respected for it. Over time, he begins to fall for her and decides that she will be his wife. There is only one problem. She refuses him. Little Fanny, dragged up from the gutter, Fanny rejects a wealthy playboy who wants to reform. She doesn't want to be the Annette Bening to his Warren Beatty. Nope. And nothing anyone can say can convince her otherwise, although everyone in this book tries to. Her reasoning is that they are not well suited and she doesn't approve of his prior behavior. Both of those things are true, but I think the real core of why she refuses him speaks to what kind of a character we're seeing in Fanny Price. And that is, she believes that someone's behavior is what you should take them for. Think back. Fanny wants to be a good companion to her aunt. She wants to be a grateful niece, a kind friend, a woman of character. And so she behaves accordingly, plain and simple. But for all of Henry Crawford's promises that he is entirely devoted to her and feels for her things he's never felt with any other woman, she takes him not for these empty words and for his past behavior. And so goes the maxim that I also live by. When people show you who they are, believe them. Fanny has seen how flighty this man is. She's seen him toy with her cousin's affections, and she becomes aware that he's been playing games with her for weeks. And the only reason she didn't realize it is she would never dream of herself being the object of his affection. He has been telling her who he is through his behavior, and she is sensible enough to take him for that. So if an argument against this book is that Fanny Price is a meek character, I challenge you to point at her weakness now, because if she were not a strong character, in spite of all of her objections, she would have just accepted Henry Crawford. That would be the easiest thing to do. But no, she rejects him right to his face, writes to his sister and basically tells her to dream on, even flat out tells her uncle, Sir Thomas, a man who has terrified her since childhood, that she can't do it, despite knowing that it would please nearly everyone. An obliging girl like Fanny, if she did not know herself, if she did not feel deeply that this was the wrong path for her, she would have just said yes. But she says no, over and over and over again. Hoping to get her to change her mind, Sir Thomas sends her back to see her parents, who she has not seen since she was a child. He's banking on the fact that the poverty of their situation will make Henry's wealth appear all the shinier. And although Fanny is extremely excited to see her parents for the first time in nearly 10 years, when she arrives, she experiences a whole new level of cruelty and neglect, the kind that comes from your own parents. They have many other children to worry about, and their lives are extremely difficult. One can assume that they've almost written Fanny off as their daughter many, many years ago because they have so many problems right there in front of them all the time. Just think about this for a second. You go back to see your parents, who you have not seen since you were a child, and from the first, they barely acknowledge you. And then once you've been there for a while, come to completely ignore you. And when they're not ignoring you, they're making crude remarks about you. Her father does that. How devastating would that be? Yet, once again, Fanny stays strong. We can imagine that this is just eating her up inside, but she doesn't make a scene. She tries to make herself useful and finds a purpose in mentoring her little sister. The whole experience was designed to make Fanny want to come back to the wealth of Mansfield. But the real reason she wants to come home, and she makes a point of noting that it is indeed Mansfield Park that is her home and not this place, is not because of the luxury she's missing out on. It's that despite all the flaws that her uncle, her cousins, her aunts have, they're hers, and she loves them. In this section, we see, and certainly Fanny sees, just what a big thing it was for the Bertrams to take her in the first place. What a different life she would have led if she would have stayed with her parents. How unhappy she would have been. So despite all the imperfections of her life at Mansfield, we get a real sense in this section that this is never where she belonged, and it's time for her to go home. And around this point, Fanny gets her great moment of redemption when Henry Crawford shows himself for what he truly is, a dog, by carrying on an affair with the married Maria. And when confronted with this fact, Henry's sister Mary, instead of acting horrified by the deed, only laments that they were caught and does more than insinuate that it was Fanny's fault. If only she'd accepted him, then he wouldn't have to go elsewhere to look for affection. First of all, ew, that's disgusting. It's not a woman's job to be a man's moral course corrector. And secondly, yeah, right. Like, he would not be throwing himself at women immediately after they were married because he got what he wanted and now he can do whatever he wants. I imagine an alternate universe where Fanny is pregnant with his child and she learns that her man has just been spreading it all over town. But Fanny was right. She saw Henry for what he truly was. And while everyone else, including her beloved Edmund, was taken in by the charms and graces of the Crawfords, Fanny knew what was up and did not become a sucker. At the end of the book, Fanny gets this redemption and starts to be more appreciated by her family. But Austen makes a point to note that both the characters in this book and we as readers can see the positive results of enduring hardship. And I don't think she's just talking about the time in Fanny's life when she was actively refusing Henry. I think she was talking about Fanny's entire life. Fanny has not always had it easy, yet she endures everything in this book with grace. She stays true to what she believes, and she's not just vindicated, but she's made the better for it. Her cousins, not having trudged very many muddy waters, were unprepared when temptation rolled into their path. Only Fanny was ready. You may mock Fanny for being too prim or prudish, but she stayed true to her morals. It is so much harder to stick to principle. Think about how much easier her life would have been had she accepted a role in the play, had she accepted Henry's offer of marriage. But she didn't. And while that may lead to a few non-starts plot-wise, I urge you to revisit what all of this says about Fanny, and potentially how Austen felt about her. Fanny Price is a quiet, infirm girl who we know is keeping things from us. But what she can't hide is her resiliency. I really felt Jane Austen whispering to the reader throughout this entire book that you will find strength in unexpected places. I could go on and on about this book. I kind of already have, since Fanny's character is not the only piece of brilliance or debatable subject that I found in this book, but that is all I have time for today. But in short, I loved this book, and I think to overlook it or to take it only at the surface level would be to see Fanny as her family originally saw her, of little consequence. But both she and this book deserve a deeper look. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below, or you can find me on a variety of different places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.